where the government tried to centralise and privatise the water sector. And then they changed their mind 2 or 3 times. And now we've got a big mess. So if I talk about the problem, I have to explain why did we get in the mess we're in, that we're running out of water. I'm just giving you an example. I have to explain a little bit of the background, and then I'm going to try and put up. Yes.
The issue you just raised here is about some kind of mess. But sometimes in business research we don't have mess, like in marketing.
Yes.
We want to find a niche. So how we go for that one? Because sometimes for industry, like we can't find a problem. There are issues, there are conflicts. But for marketing, maybe sometimes we don't have a problem. We want to be better. How about that one?
That's right. There's not only one fit. I think the real question here was about industry. That's why I was talking to industry. But you're right. I think it depends on your different purpose. But if you're starting with industry, then I think you have to give a little bit of the background. But basically, you're right. You need to explain what is your purpose. Where are you coming from? Some people will come in from the general big mess, and other people will come in to try and improve something. So in your case, improving the marketing strategy or something, you're coming from a different direction. But you will explain. It's more important in your example when you are trying to improve something. Is also you have to explain the background, why you want to do a better job. Now, this would probably be where you would more closely link it to improving also our knowledge and theories of maybe a topic like marketing. So there's not just one way to do it. I think it depends on where you're coming from. But wherever you're coming from, you have to tell us, and the place to tell us is in the introduction. But then we get on and say, so yes, I mean, also that will influence the structure of the literature review, in that some people will talk a little bit about the larger context. If it's a mess or a problem, a big problem, and the problem is a mess, or it's a different kinds of problem. Some problems are a big mess. Why did something fail? Why have we got in such a difficult problem when it rains every day in Malaysia? It shouldn't be running out of water. But on the other hand, if it's about improving, I mean, a lot of PhDs, and is you have the problem is why aren't we better? Why can't we do better business or better marketing or better whatever? Get the model, and that's where the model and the practice come together. So even when you're really trying to come up with and look at theories of something, you still have to contextualize it. Some people don't. You still have to contextualize. That's why in the introduction, let's say, I think your example is a good one. So if you don't mind me using you as an example, you wanting to look at applications on the smartphone to be more successful. All right, now this is it. You know. So if we have to frame this in the introduction, this is where you're coming from. You see an opportunity for good business opportunity that can make lots of money and be very successful by doing a better job designing new applications for games on smartphones. And
even sometimes, we have some cases like when we do PhD and our context is Malaysia, we say like in Western country, they have this revenue from game application. Why not Malaysia cannot join this market? Also that one is kind of...
Well, let me just make a little bit of a simple response to this to cover every situation. As I briefly, very quickly, because I just went quickly, I said in one problem statement for PhD, it's one of the secrets, and one of the whole secrets of generating knowledge is linking the general to the particular. Now this is in natural science research, it's in human science, social science research. We're coming at slightly different perspective, but everybody is trying to link, whether you call it a sample in the quantitative terms of natural science, or case study or in qualitative approach, you're still talking of linking one example about a problem, a mess, or a solution. And so people are coming from different directions. I'm very much aware of this. And another way of putting it, some people are much more focused on the practical problem and some people focus on the theoretical problem. But in both cases, you need to link, even if it's a theoretical problem, you still have to look at it in some example or case study or some empirical data collection. That's why I mean, one of the biggest problems is that people do not link the theory to the practice. There's no connection. And when you have no connection between the data collection and the literature review, which often happens in PhDs, that's why, I mean, I just have to look up the list of contents and I can see it before I even read a PhD. I mean, I don't spend 5 minutes. I will double check. And that's why a lot of other examiners don't. Because they think, because they're often wrong actually, because they don't really read it to make sure. But yes, I mean, whichever way you're going, so what I say, and I've worked with quite a lot of people in management and business studies, and I try to ask them, what are you more interested in? Some people are more interested in the practical problem, and some people are more interested in the theoretical. Well, let's put another one. Some people want to be the expert in the theory, and some people want to be expert in the practical area. For example, in your case, as I said to you, do you want to be more of an expert in good design for applications on a smartphone? Or do you want to be expert in marketing? Which one? Now, it's a bit, maybe you want to be both, but one of my other secrets of academic knowledge and writing is that when you can't make a decision and prioritise, you end up messing both up. And one of the secrets is if people work with me, I make them choose. Which one is it? Because if you choose, you can still do both. But if you can't choose and you're jumping backwards and forwards, it's very likely that you mess everything up. So one of the things that I do as a mentor or supervisor, I want to try and find out, you know, the people I'm working with, are they more interested in being an expert in the area of the theory, or more expert in the practical knowledge? No, it's a little bit the other way around. The way the literature will frame this, I mean, the literature is supposed to frame the problem. So that's why the problem links everything together. You saw my first slide. If you don't have a problem and not clear on it, you haven't prioritised, and you're not clear what you're doing, then you're going to have mess. Your PhD will be mess, right? But if you have a clear problem and had to think about it and you had to prioritise, then well, let me now link it up, because the next couple of slides actually are about the literature review. So these will answer a little bit of what you're asking. So the literature review for people who are a little bit more interested in a practical problem or industry or whatever will be a little bit different from those who really want to focus on more on the you know, the marketing or some theoretical context. And both are okay. It depends on what you want to focus on. So you have to do that first. You have to be clear first. Otherwise, you might have a literature review that doesn't do either. It doesn't link to the practical problem, and it doesn't very clearly frame the link between the area. So this is why you have bad literature reviews. They end up being list of information, list of readings, and they don't tell us how does a literature review connect to your PhD. Let me show you a couple of slides. There's one slide, I hope it's on the next one. Yes, you'll see the top quote. If you can't see at the back, I'll tell you. The dirty secret known by those who sit on dissertation committees is that most literature reviews are poorly conceptualised and written. Most literature reviews are very bad. Believe me what I'm saying now? And this is leading to all these problems, plagiarism and whatever, are sort of linked to this. And annotated bibliography, list of information. That's why the design is actually very important. But to have good design, you have to prioritise what you're doing. Is it more the practical? Is it more the theoretical? Is it, what's the problem? If you're clear on both, if you can answer both those questions, what's my problem? And am I more interested in the practical context or more interested in the theoretical context or the area of knowledge? Then you can write a good literature review. But if you're not clear on those questions, you might end up, this is what happens, a lot of people end up writing 2 or 3 literature reviews, and a lot of supervisors, I don't like it. And they may not be able to explain why they don't like it, but Some people, at least they can see this is no good. They say, go and write again. But better to get right the first time. In fact, here's my other advice. See, when I talk about literature review, the advice in many countries is that they say to you, go and spend a year reading. You're not allowed to have questions. And a lot of people drop out during the year. So if you came to my other session, I told you the international statistics on PhD failure is typically at the best universities is 50%. I don't know what it is at UTM. Does anybody know what it is at UTM? Okay, we won't go there. We won't go there. But my point is that my advice is to get the problem before you read. At least have a working question. Because when people have no question, they read for 1 year. They have so many readings all over the place, and they go off and they keep changing their mind what they're doing. This is what a lot of people do with PhD. They keep changing every few months. We're going to go in this direction, that direction. 3 years later, 3 years later, still doing it. That's why a lot of people drop out. But if you have, my advice is to have before you do the reading, as you do the reading. I mean, you can change it, but you have to have good reason to change it. You shouldn't be jumping backwards and forwards. So that's why we spend time getting good design first. Let's link it to the other. This was to this is to do with referencing. I'll come back to this one because that wasn't. I think it's on the other side. Main purpose of literature. It should demonstrate academic relevance. Why are you doing the PhD? It should show that you are good at academic writing and good referencing skills. So we'll talk a little bit about the referencing, which was on I mixed the slides up, so I'll go back to that slide in a minute. You should be able to relate the ideas and theories to particular contexts of practice. So that's why your problem should both have a practical and theoretical. All PhD problems should have both a little bit of practical application and theoretical implication. But some people will be more interested in the theory and some people more interested in the practice. That's perfectly okay. But everybody has to make that link, one way or the other. And we should see that indirectly or directly in the literature review. We should have comprehensive and critical engagement with what is your main area. So part of literature review is where do you fit into the literature? That is actually the number one purpose of literature review. Is this a PhD? Can we see that it fits into some established academic area? That's the number one purpose of literature review. How many people thinking about this already? I mean, a lot of people don't. But that's really why we do. That's why you do literature review for PhD. That's why when you get advice, somebody gives advice, go and get a theory and write one theory as part of literature review with all the information about the theory and the lists. That's why it's such bad advice. It's very bad advice. It's completely against the real purpose of literature review for proper PhD. What else? Ability to prioritise, I said to prioritise, synthesise, academic discussion. In other words, when you read, you have to put into your own words. This is really the art of paraphrasing. So one of the things is that you see almost two opposite problems. One is in literature review where people put in reference, I read this, I read that, I read this, and it said this and it said that. But then you have the opposite problem when people put in, this person said this, they're quoting. So some very bad literature review they have 100 quotes. Now, you'll see with the referencing, I'll come back, that's why I'm sort of in the middle about what I call indirect and direct referencing. But the art of paraphrasing is one of the most important skills of literature review and academic writing, even for academic paper, not just PhD. The ability to paraphrase is that this is the idea about marketing in terms of the design of applications for smartphones, just to use your example. And these are some of the experts in the area who everybody reads their books or their papers. And you need to show that you have read the most important people. So either, I'll come back to this in reference, either the most important or the most irrelevant. I say that because some people give bad advice and saying, You're only allowed to put in academic reference that is from the journal. What if it's about on the internet? What if it's in a PowerPoint presentation? One of my PhD students from a couple of years ago, he actually wrote an email to one of the international experts in, what's his name? I keep forgetting his name, but actually a lot of you will know his name because he's a cross-cultural business studies. He's the #1 person in the world. Anyway, he's doing a PhD, so he sends an email to this guy and asks him a question. He responded. He actually sent an email back to the student when I was down in Skidday. Can you use that in a PhD? Yes, you can. I will talk in a minute about there are ways of using different kinds of evidence for the referencing. So some of this will come linked to the referencing. Well, it's also a good question. Here's another question will follow. Here's the other way I put it. Actually, he put that in the literature review, but here's another question. Can you put, if you're reading, I told you at the beginning about the data gathering should be gathering evidence. What about if some of the evidence is actually from the literature? Can you put literature into the data collection, data analysis? Well, in my framework, you can. You can, because if you go, we'll come to this in a minute, I don't want to get diverted because the problem of getting data is such a big problem. A lot of people write surveys and they get nobody to answer, nobody will answer. So, that's why multiple mode, not just multiple mode in terms of quantitative and qualitative, but different forms of evidence. So, for example, that's why when I work with people I work with, I say, why don't you start with a warm-up survey? Then you do a focus group, and then for some of the people in the focus group, you do interviews. You can have 3 sources. And if you didn't get enough evidence the first time, you get more evidence in the follow-up. But one way or another, you're going to get answers or information. Now, in certain areas, it might involve, for example, I do a lot of stuff on policy research. So, of course, policy research, policies will, some of it will be in the literature review, and some of it will be in the data collection. And if you're doing the policies in a business, or the strategies, business strategies, and if they're documents, it may be that some of them are in the literature review and some of them will be in the data collection. At least as part of the data, at least as part of the evidence that you...
Some of them there, like my case is mobile application, I need to look at the number of downloads in the website, then I report that.
Well, that will be part of the evidence. So that's why one of the reasons my model for developing the data gathering, data building framework is so good and so useful that it not only makes everything very simple in the sequence, but it allows you to collect different forms of evidence. You can get, so some of the questions in the data collection could be for, that's why I know a lot of you are using instruments that have nothing to do with your literature review or your research questions. Somebody else did an instrument in relation to marketing or something. You're using it. Well, I'm not going to say no to that. I say, but that's probably only going to be useful for some of your data questions. So I said, go ahead and do it. I'm not saying no to it, but it won't answer all your questions. So, in my model, multiple forms of evidence is even better. It's a great idea. As long as you're covering all the information you need to answer your research questions. We'll come back to this, so keep an eye on time, and this will come up in the next one. The next section will focus a bit on the methodology. But let's come back to literature review. So the key functions, I was trying to link this across. I think you've got the overview about the literature review here. Let me start to link it to the, well, you can see why the functions, let me bring that back. Synthesized knowledge, familiar with keywords, the theories. This is the ecology, ecosystem of the literature review. You have to connect a particular problem with a recognized academic area. In other words, the general structure of literature review is to begin with the academic. Where do you start? What's the area that you want to identify you're making contribution to? That should be the opening section. The opening section of the literature review should identify the main area that you want to make contribution to. Right? It might be marketing, then maybe it's some special area of marketing underneath. Well, you can see you go from the general down to particular. The first area is the general one, second section will be more specific, and then right at the bottom, it should really say, where do you fit in? And it should frame that. I'll go back very quickly to the previous one, because I talked about direct and indirect referencing, and I'm going to make this other point. Indirect referencing is really where people paraphrase and put the reference at the end of the sentence. Direct referencing is where people quote, or say this person said this, or identify directly their theory or idea. I'll give you a short version of this. I think the best literature review will show both. I would expect to see both. If there's too many quotes, then we lead to a problem in that direction. If it's all indirect referencing, you can easily end up doing plagiarism, have opposite problem. And it's for a different reason. So the indirect referencing is showing what you understand. So that makes it easy to select the quotes. The only quotes that you should put in should be very good quotes to make clear better than what you can do. The quotes really illustrate, somebody says something so good, so effectively that you can't improve upon it. Well, okay, put it in as a quote. And the same for academic paper, not just for PhD, that's my advice. In good academic paper, I would expect also to generally see a bit of balance of both. But I will say this, the more experience that you get, then you probably do more and more indirect referencing, because you're focusing on what you want to say. When you're beginning, you're insecure and you want to show you've read everything, so probably a little bit more direct referencing. But as a rule, I'll say 50-50. Try and have a bit of a balance between the two. So just to be very clear, this is an example of direct. For example, Pavio argues that visual modes of learning are just as important as verbal. That's a direct reference. Indirect is, in the multimedia age, teachers are increasingly aware of the importance of visual learning. Pavio, 1998. There is a paraphrase of what Pavio put in the, because it might be a particular point or it might be the whole book. The whole book will be paraphrased in one sentence. And what you've got to show in literature review is that you've covered the most important people.
Okay. Sometimes someone says about different concepts, like value and quality. But my concern and my study is about value. And as you know, value and quality, there are two different keywords. So I'm afraid if I bring the quality, then people will be confused. I'm talking about value or I'm talking about quality. So the part that I want, I just take that part. Like, the person has talked about value and quality is like be antecedent of like consumer choice. But for me, I just looking for value, then I just bring my own interest. Can I do this one?
My advice to this, I told you that the linking of words and ideas is all about selection and combination. It's combination and selection. My answer to this is it depends on your purpose. If you need to identify what you're doing and you don't want to get caught up in confusion, leave out what's confusing. Don't even refer to something that's very close. I just leave it out and focus on the concept that you want to focus on, even if there's a synonym somebody else is using. I just leave that out if it's not important and you only want to focus on it. If it is important, then you have to directly confront it, and you just say, this person said this other person is really saying the same thing, but they're using different concepts. Well, put that into the literature and say it directly. So you have to make a decision. Either you focus only what's important, or if it's important and it's a confusion, address the confusion. Separate and say, I really only want to go in this direction with this guy, and this other stuff, this other reference, and this other area is going, just make it very clear. So that's my general advice on that. Let me have a couple more slides of literature review, and I'll just see if there's any other questions about it. Okay. Good balance of direct and indirect, selective use of quotes, care with paraphrasing, that make sure I mean, one thing I will say that, you know, I mean, I have an expression, I just put it here, there's a difference between what I call surface and deep plagiarism. Surface and deep plagiarism. In other words, if you're using the Turnitin and all the journals use it, they have this quota that you have a certain percentage you have a problem. So my answer is this: if you're fundamentally, if you only have surface problem, it can be fixed very quickly. If you have deep plagiarism, you're in big trouble, because deep plagiarism is really the ideas of is at the level of the ideas. Surface plagiarism is at the level of the language. So if the ideas are already there and they're your ideas, any sort of, maybe you accidentally cut and paste something in, then you can fix it very quickly. So I have this distinction, surface and deep plagiarism, is that if you do what I'm saying in the first place, you will never have deep plagiarism. You will never have it. You might have accident of some surface plagiarism, but it's not serious and you can fix very quickly. So that's another argument for doing this. If you do the literature review, the way I'm suggesting, you will never have deep plagiarism. Any plagiarism issues that will come up can easily be fixed, because fundamentally you're not plagiarising the ideas. You're putting into your own words and your own framework, and you'll never have that problem. What organisational structure? I mentioned some of this already. General to the particular, can include theoretical to applied. I mentioned this. So I try to use what I call the law of three. It's a fundamental law, and I find it just simplifies everything. So everything you see I'm talking is a law of three. Three questions. I try to use, in every paper I write, three structures. It changes a little bit, and it's not fixed for some purpose, but it's a good organising approach to go from the general area to down to what you specifically focus on. So later I will talk about two kinds of academic paper. So one, for the literature review, we'll use that structure. If it's what I call IMRAD paper, for a lot of journals only want IMRAD paper, okay, that's a different structure. But this is a good way to get yourself very clear on building the knowledge. So the literature review, I find it very, very useful to say that just as somebody comes to me and says they have 20 research questions, and I say, I only want 3. I said, well, I want one big one and 3 supporting questions. And it's a good discipline to try and organise, and it really helps people to bring 20 down into 3. They can still keep some of the others as data questions. It's the same for literature review, where I see some people have 20 sections. And I say, it's too much. Let's have 3 big sections, and I let you have some subsections, and then we are building down. It's framing down, not building, framing down. But I find in my experience having 3 big sections is a very good way to get discipline and focus and a good structure. Okay. This is more to do with, I think, some of the stuff. Are there any more quick questions on methodology? Sorry, literature review, and I have some other slides on referencing, which to do with what is a good reference or bad reference. So I'll come back to that. But any other quick queries on literature review? Because it's one of the 2 most important areas. Okay, let's go on to the methodology. I think I just put some of this very quickly. This was to do with, okay, I think I forget about this one. It's trying to do, we're doing the same structure. I used this in the last workshop of saying we have to be clear how methodology is about, and the main definition of methodology is getting the right sort of evidence to answer your question. So before you talk about qualitative or quantitative, in fact, it doesn't matter whatever you talk about, the real notion of methodology is, have you got the evidence to answer your question? This should be universal to both qualitative and quantitative. So what I find, I will tell you, we have the same problem for very bad qualitative methodology as very bad quantitative methodology. Very bad methodology tends to be very descriptive. Good methodology goes from the descriptive to the interpretive. Whether you're using quantitative or qualitative, it doesn't really matter. Because either way, you're producing the evidence to answer the question. So understanding the difference between methodology as methods of data collection, and then there's methods of data analysis. That's a whole separate issue. Now, I'm not going to go into this because it's a different workshop, and I want to keep it focused on the writing. I'll say this, for the purposes of writing a good structure, for writing data analysis and findings, whether you call it case study or observation or statistical analysis, it doesn't really matter. It really doesn't matter. What we want to see is a structure that you have found some evidence in relation to a series of data questions. And you need to be able to write up. So, I have been working, and it's always a little bit different. For each of my PhD students, they're all doing a little bit different. So I don't say exactly the same thing. But I'll say some of it's the same. What I want to see in every section of data analysis to generate findings is that, firstly, you describe in one paragraph why did you need to find this out? Why was this important? What was the evidence that you found out? And then give us a bit of balance of, where possible, especially when it involves surveys, interviews, and is between what I call an overview, where possible, and some example or anecdote. So in other words, if you're a reader, if you have, let's say you have a statistical table with a coding in relation to one area, that can be very good. But it's also good if you've done interview or survey where somebody gave you some very good quotes. Then to help the reader to have a very concrete example of a certain problem that they answered the interview or the survey, and you list it with the overview of what 40–50% people said this and 20% said that, and you have an overview of, because this is another way of doing both qualitative and quantitative. You can have, let's say, you're asking a series of questions, and some questions are closed questions, and some questions are open, where you're getting the perspective or the opinion of someone. Well, then we can say, let's say you're coding, very simple, you have a coding of maybe 5 different responses. And you say 10% said this, 20% said that, whatever, that's the overview. But then you linked it to how there was a specific problem that you wanted to focus on, why you're asking this question. And then how some of the responses put their finger on. So the example, I'll just mention very quickly. The example, I don't know whether they got printed, that first 2 pages of a paper on the global brain drain. So the global brain drain paper. Did everybody get a copy of this or not? I'll start to mention, because I think we're starting to 4:10. I think we're supposed to finish already, but okay.
I think we can continue up to 5 if everyone doesn't have problem with me. Can we continue to 5? Will it?
Well, let me put it another way, because if anybody needs to go, I can move on very. If we could focus a bit more on this now, I think we've. In fact, I'll use this to transition to talking about paper publication, and we might do this. And if anybody needs to leave, and then if anybody needs to leave, let's say. Are there people need to leave fairly soon? Let me just say, I'll spend the next 10 or 15 minutes getting back on the paper, and then if anybody needs to leave at 4:30, I will leave other topics after that, so I know a lot of people really want to focus on the paper. So let's do that. And at 4:30, I will ask you if you want to leave. Okay, then anybody needs to leave at that time. Okay, I've just mentioned what you've seen here. What you've seen is actually not what I was about to talk about, but I'll make a connection, and then I will talk about this. In the PhD, some of you might know Raj, but in the PhD on this, This involved looking at people who are part of the global range rate, asking why did you leave your country and you go live in another country? So in trying to link surveys and interviews about this, we actually have to have a coding to say people left for certain reasons. Maybe people left for economic reasons or other social reasons, to give their family better opportunity. They go and live in another country. They want to work in another country. Do they want to go back to their home country? Whatever. There's a lot of different responses. So to these kind of questions, one of the things I say is that if you have a clear set of questions, actually one of my bits of advice for the research is that you develop your own coding before you ask. That will help you to, so in other words, if you ask why did you leave your country to go to another country, you could have, before you actually start asking, you should develop a code where you have maybe the 5 or 6 main responses that you know you're going to, most people will say some of this. This will help you to organise. It will also help you to speed up, it's not today's topic, to speed up the data analysis, because if you have a coding on a piece of paper for every question, you can have your existing coding and you can add any new ideas or any new response that is not in the coding and extend your coding. And you can do most of the coding called just-in-time flexibility. This is used in business. Just-in-time research coding is that you have the structure and you develop the structure as you do it. You don't have to wait 6 months to transcribe, spend a lot of money and waste all your time. You can do it on one day. But I won't go into this, but I'm trying to see how it links to the writing. The writing part is that for each question, and certainly different kinds of question, you should show, if you're, let's say you're interviewing 25 people or 20 people, you need to show that some of your questions reflect certain perspective or coding. So a lot of this will be simply percentages. It's statistics really, but without having to use expensive software or whatever, or coefficient, coding and analysing coefficients. That's unnecessary. That's something different. So my point is, I'm trying to say, firstly, my main advice on writing for data analysis and findings is firstly to have a clear set of questions that relate, or data questions that relate to your research questions. They should have a meaningful sequence, so that if you're doing survey or interview, we will have the sequence from the first question to the last question. And to be honest, that's where I see a bit of work. I make all my students who do this polish this up until they go and do pilot. They go and see also the language, because one of the biggest problems, just to digress, is that one of the reasons very difficult for many PhD students to get good data from surveys or interviews, one of the reasons is the language is too difficult for the respondents. They don't understand what you're asking. So you need to simplify it, and you need to do pilot to say which questions need to be simplified. A lot of PhD students don't do that.
We have 60 questions.
It's too many. And I see some of these where, if 60, a lot of them are the same question. So you need to simplify enough. And you need to polish it so that people can answer it. And really, if you do it really well, if you do it so you get exact sequence, say, I'd say about 30 is about the limit of really what you want to ask. And maybe even less, you might make it less. But 30 is a good structure for different reasons, and you can simplify the writing up. And when you simplify, so I actually get my PhD student to put, this is where I want them to work. I want them to think and actually to practice. Ask somebody to see, do they understand your language? Can they answer these questions? Are they too difficult? And are you asking the right sequence? So you're not repeating, you're not wasting your time, and you're not going off all over the place. The first question to the last question gets all the information. It's optimal, it's efficient, it's effective in getting the information that you need. And then if you didn't get it from a survey, go and get someone from interview. But by the end of, after a while, you'll get all the information you need to write up. So I'm assuming that once you've done that, my idea of writing to make very useful for examiner what I'm trying to say is that if you use the same method for each of the questions, because each of the questions becomes a heading and a subheading, and a whole chapter 4 of data analysis and findings should be a sequence of headings that goes from the foundation right through to your main question. Now, I'll just make another point, is that some of my PhD students, the main questions are actually in chapter 4. In some of them, especially if they're more interested in the theoretical implications, especially if their supervisor asks them, I want you to link to this one theory. Do it in chapter 5. Spend a whole chapter in discussing. Go back to literature and revisit what you put in the literature and make it a big chapter by itself. That will make your PhD stronger. You can revisit, and what about if you develop your own theory? A lot of people who wrote a PhD want to have their own theory. Chapter 5. That's where you put it. So what we're trying to build up to. So I'm saying this, in some cases, the chapter 4, that's all you do, and then you just have conclusion in chapter 5. Other people, I say, have a separate chapter 5 where you can discuss in great depth. But in the chapter 4, I would like to, I tried to work out with each, because it has to be a little bit different for each PhD student. But that we should have a method that they feel comfortable presenting certain kinds of evidence in a sequence that builds up, that is easy for the reader to see. And normally it should have a bit of a balance between overview of percentages of, let's say you interview 20, 25 people, 50% said this, 30% said that, but then you focus on some of the quotes, or anecdotes or examples, and you have a bit of both. I find, as a general rule, especially for people in business and management, that is a good way to do this. Now, I actually was trying to find last night a good example, and because I got sidetracked because I had to finish a paper last night to send off, I couldn't find it. I really wanted to show you, so I'm hoping you understand what I'm saying, because I think, let me say this, as I just said to one of the students I'm working with, this is going to be the whole thing whether you pass or fail PhD. If you can get it right and showing the evidence, sufficient evidence, and you do it with the method that you're doing it, you'll get PhD if you do a good job of it. If you don't, you'll have a lot of problems. And I mean, to be honest, that's one of the issues we've been grappling with the paper, that this has just got accepted for the Journal of Policy, what was the Journal of International Journal of Public Policy. And this was a literature review. So let me link it to some of the discussion about, let me go. I'll come back to some of the tips, and we'll do that at the last end. I'll come back to the tips last, but let me finish up with transforming your PhD into academic papers and publications. Let me just, I'll give you some general advice. My advice is that all of you should aim to do 2 publications from your PhD. One of them should be effectively a version of your literature review, and the other one should be what I call IMRAD paper. For both of them, there are two models very famous in people who teach academic writing. One of them is the work of John Swales called CARS, Creating Research Space. And it's a method, really, you can use it in the paper or the PhD. It's where do you fit in, into the larger literature or problem. So you're establishing a territory. Where are you going to be the expert? Where is your niche? Where are you going to fit in? So in the literature, where does your PhD fit into the literature? Or where does it fit into the practical problem? Maybe it's a focus on industry problem. But where do you fit in? Who's the audience? What are you trying to do? And where do you fit in? And then you occupy and you show that you're the expert. So if you do the PhD, you should either be an expert in a special area, which could be practical, or you're an expert in a general area. Maybe you're an expert in marketing, or maybe you're just an expert at designing applications, game applications for smartphones. Or maybe you're both. But this is where you should prioritise. Okay, so there's cars. The next slide, this gets to the heart of the problem. I'm going to give you some general advice about publication here, and then I'm going to talk a bit about how you should aim to develop strategy. A lot of academic journals only want what they call IMRAD paper. IMRAD paper is, what are your methods, short literature review, methods, what did you find, and that's what they publish. So all of you should probably aim to do an IMRAD paper. I just said all you should aim to do a literature review, but let me put this another way. Anybody who learns to write a paper or PhD using IMRAD is going to have problems. It's not a very good way to learn. In fact, it's the worst one. And there's a very famous saying, two things I would say. One is that IMRAD was mainly for the scientists. It was never meant for the social science, for management, education, policy. It was never meant for these areas. But unfortunately, because engineers and scientists dominate in the university and academic, all the papers are now doing this.
University technology.
You said it, I didn't. That's all they understand, especially, yeah, it's true, engineering universities, that's all they understand. They don't understand, people, they don't understand, so if you're an engineer or some sort of natural scientist, normally you can publish a report in 3 or 4 months. If you're in management and business, it can take 2 or 3 years. They don't believe it, they don't understand because they never publish.
They came here, they had a workshop, they came here, one guy, one of the top guys in UTM, he was from chemistry, then he was making fun of us that you cannot publish early because they don't have any idea.
He is ill-informed, he does not understand. And unfortunately, it's not just people from different areas, it's people who never publish into teaching. That's why some of the people who are doing this are language teachers. I mean, look, let's say this openly. The academic vice-chancellor came up 6 months ago and told us to the staff, he said only 20% of the academic staff at UTM are publishing. 80% of staff do not publish at all. And many of them are supervising and asking their students to publish paper. Actually, a lot of them ask to put my name on the paper. But it's a problem. So I think, you know, especially when they say, if you don't publish, we don't let you graduate. If you're in the area of business and whatever, this is very unfair. I'll be the first person to say that. I'm actually quite happy for you to quote me. I don't mind anybody knows it, because they must understand better. If they're going to ask, you know.
Already recording there.
You can record. I hope you got that accurately. I'm quite happy to stand behind that statement. It's important actually for the benefit of the university, when they understand that more people will publish from business and education and these other areas, because there'll be better support and better understanding. So that's why I'm quite happy to stand behind, because I'm trying to encourage people to publish more. UTM is having a bit of risk of losing its research status because only 20% of academic staff are publishing. That is why I ask all students to publish. Well, I mean, I'm not going to get into that, but what I'm now going to say is just to help you to publish, because I'm trying to help you. So, but it's a sort of context, because you might be getting a lot of bad advice. You need to be able to defend yourself a little bit to say, in science, engineering, you can get published in 3 months. In business journal, they may take 1 month to review. You know how long this paper took for the review process alone? It took 18 months. 18 months it took, and now it's in a good journal. The reviewing took 18 months. Well, in this case, I'm still a little bit unclear, except that what happened was a little miscommunication, and this is typical. there's different approach to journal. Some journal, and some of them are getting better. A lot. The real problem is that in areas like business, it comes to the editor. It sits on the desk, and then he sends it out. And 6 months, in 6 months, give me a response. And after 6 months, a lot of the answers say, if they make some changes, I would recommend publication. So the editor sends it back to you and says, look, we want you to make some changes, and I'll give you another month or two. So another month or two, you've put some changes, and you send back. Then they have to send out to review again. It sits on desk for another few months. It's very easily a year or so, you know, and it's quite normal for a lot of journals. Now, I will say that some of the journals are really trying to speed up now, even in these areas. But, you know, so it is one of the things you need to think about is that when you read, what you need to do is target journals. And when you target, you need to see a little bit their format. So when you write 2 papers, some journals will allow a literature review type of paper, and some will only accept IMRAD paper. There is no use sending the wrong paper to the wrong journal. It's just wasting your time. And then 6 months later you get rejected and you have to send it out to somewhere else. So you need to have strategies. You need to be very strategic. Everything you're doing with PhD and with academic publication. So the selection, you know, going and checking the format, also choosing the journal that reflects, that's most suitable. So you should go and look at a few different journals. The first journal may not be the most suitable one. And to be honest, in my own experience, the one that you think will be most suitable, they can't see why this is good for them. They say go and publish, send it to somewhere else. Sometimes it's a bit difficult to know exactly. So, and another dilemma I'll say is this. I mean, one of the problems with this is that Razak, he wanted to send to an index, the top index journal at Cambridge University. And this is part of the strategy. And I said, I don't think we have any chance of getting published. So we're wasting our time spending 6 months sending to that journal. So one of the dilemmas that you have to face, here's the other part of the journal. Nearly all the reports for engineering and science have become indexed. A lot of the good journals for business and policy are open journals, which don't have index factor. This is another issue. Now, I can't give you the exact answer, and I think, but you have to make some decisions on how difficult it is to get in, how long it might take to get published, and you know, even if the university says to you they only want to have index journal in ISI journals, which is really the advice of UTM, it may be that it's going to be impossible for some of the paper. Literature review type paper is less likely because the open journals are more likely to accept the literature review papers. So, well, there's your answer a little bit. Maybe you aim to have one in an indexed ICI journal, give the IMRAD paper, and the literature review paper, if it fits into the open journal, and some of the open journal are actually have higher what's the word? Higher impact factors than actually the ISI journals. A lot of ISI journals nobody reads it. This is another issue, and you have to think about if you want to develop reputation and if you're developing a good model. To be honest, I do publish in ISI journals, but I don't need to publish them. I would rather publish where there's an audience who wants to hear new ideas. So you have to balance all these considerations. I'm not going to give you the exact answer because everybody will have a different answer. I know there's a pressure, but I'm going to give you a strategy. Have 2 journals, literature review, 2 papers you should all be aiming to do. One should be a literature review paper. The other should be an IMRAD paper. Maybe you send the IMRAD paper to the the ISI journals and the literature review paper for the other sorts of journals. That could be a strategy that I would recommend in any case. Does anybody else need to go at this stage? I can stop for a minute just if anybody else needs to go. Okay, I'm going to do two steps. One is I'm going to get very practical now. I'm going to talk a little bit about the structure.
Thank you for good information. Thank you, Jen.
For those that are staying, I will continue saying that a little bit of what I want to speak about here can be good for both types of paper. The IMRAD paper and also for the literature review type of paper. Some of what I want to talk about you can use for both. So there is a real art in writing an abstract. There's a real art in writing the introduction for the paper. And this is also, let me just say this is also the same issue because all of you, if you're going to write a paper, will be thinking about going to the conference. And I'll give you the advice is that a conference is a good focus to get you writing the paper. It will give you a date that you must have ready. And a lot of conferences will have opportunities to publish the paper as well now. A lot of the conferences will have journals linked to them that you can publish in. You can put this in to get published in a journal if you come to the conference. One of the good things, give me some advice. You don't need to go to the very big expensive international conference. In fact, you're probably better off not doing that. It's much easier to go to, there's a lot of local conferences, and quite a lot of conferences in Kuala Lumpur, and a good thing is a lot of them will give you a discount if you're a PhD student. So I'm now seeing, about a few years ago, the typical registration for a lot of conferences, not the big international conferences, which are very expensive, but the middle range conferences used to cost average about 400 ringgit even for staff, maybe 200 for a PhD student. Now they're about 800 for the staff, and sometimes 400 for, this is the average one. So also you have to have a strategy about getting the best value for the money you spend on going to conference. But if we link it to the publication, even the abstract for the paper, the presentation, the abstract for the paper can be a version that you actually send, and it gives you good practice. Now, I just try to simplify. It's the same as trying to have a strategy for the data findings and analysis for each of the sections. If you have a simple sort of format, keeping it quite simple, so I have a sort of rules. So I even say, I'll just tell you generally, for an abstract, the first sentence or two should say, why should you read this? What's important? It can be a little bit of the background. So normally the first sentence